Okay, we'll make a start. And once again, thanks for joining us. My name is Rick Jones, and I'm the General Manager of EML in Victoria. On behalf of EML, I'd like to welcome you to this morning's event, where we're going to talk about Victoria's new psychosocial health regulations, which are coming into effect on the 1st of December. Just a reminder, if you could please turn off your cameras and your microphones. We have nearly 1,000 people joining us today. Before we get underway, I would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation as the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, and pay our respects to both elders past and present. And I'd like to also acknowledge the lands of which you sit on as well. We're here today to talk about new regulations, and it's important to be aware of the environmental context in the workplaces we are operating in. Just this year, EML launched our mental health white paper, partnering with Monash University and Professor Alex Coley to showcase new research that uncovered the status of mental health in Australia, in the Australian workplaces today. And it's somewhat sobering reading. The research shows that nearly 1 in 3 Australians, so nearly 4 million people, responded to having a mental health condition lasting at least 6 months. And the data clearly showed that certain industries, occupations, and worker cohorts were more at risk to mental injury. I do encourage you all to take a look at this white paper to gain the insights to help you manage the risk in line with the industry you operate and the people you work with. We'll share a link in the follow-up communications from the sessions to the white paper as well. The data is a call to action for employers to ensure a mentally safe workplace and protect against mental injury claims. And the financial personal cost of mental health injuries is huge for individuals, workplaces, organisations, and the community. And in my discussions with employers, they often ask, how can they distinguish between mental health issues stemming from personal circumstances and those driven by work? And those of us who are employers on the call will often recognise when personal circumstances encroach into the workplace as well. And as with physical injuries, we need to take a holistic view when it comes to mental health. Whether or not mental health injury is compensable under workers' compensation, it still affects the workplace through absenteeism, lost productivity, and the overall well-being of teams. And that's why it's so important for employers to take a comprehensive view of employee health and well-being. And the purpose of these new regulations is to ensure that all of us as employers provide a psychologically safe workplace for our employees. It can be seen as overwhelming, but there are clear actions an employer can take, and the aim of this session is to support you to do this. I'm pleased to report we have 2 expert speakers joining us today, Dewal Patel and Arthur Papagiannis, to share their knowledge with us today. They will each speak for 15 to 20 minutes, and then we'll have time at the end for some questions. I'd first off like to start by introducing Dewal Patel as our first speaker. He is a founder and director of RAS OHS, a consultancy based in Victoria. He is also a former WorkSafe Victorian inspector with over 20 years' experience in the high-risk industries. As a master mariner, he has held leadership roles globally, ensuring compliance with health, safety, and environmental regulations. Dewal brings practical compliance expertise and frontline occupational insight to workplace health and safety. He's going to give us an overview of the new regulations and outline key expectations for employers, drawing on his experience as former workplace psychosocial safety inspector to discuss potential enforcement approaches as well. And our second expert speaker today will be Arthur Papagiannis. Arthur is a registered psychologist and CEO of AP Psychology and Consulting Services, advising executives on preventing psychosocial harm and meeting WHS obligations. With more than 25 years' experience, Arthur is a leader in psychosocial health and safety, a trusted executive coach and speaker. Arthur helps shape safer mental health workplaces, cultures across Australia and New Zealand. Arthur is going to talk to us this morning about the WorkSafe funded Mental Health Workplaces program, which will support 300 Victorian businesses over the next year. He will explain how psychosocial risk assessments can lead to targeted action plans and share case studies highlighting how businesses have strengthened controls and improved compliance with state regulations. A warm welcome to both, but I now will hand over to Dewal to take us through his presentations. Thanks, Dewal.
Thank you, Rick. Thank you for the introduction. It's amazing to see the large turnout, and it's quite timely with the regulations coming up soon. Will be in force on 1st of December 2025. Before I jump into my presentation, I would like to request the audience to kind of apply a systems thinking mindset, which will allow you to probe your internal organizational systems more objectively. Whilst I still acknowledge there is an individual level of support that's absolutely necessary in the entire risk management process. Yeah. Now, the context around this regulation may appear new. However, it's tied back to the Occupational Health and Safety Act, which has been here for a while. These new regulations have been created through the Act, and the importance of that is that any contraventions of employer obligations would be connected with the OHS Act. So more than often, we would have seen employer duties sit within the Section 21 of the Act, which requires employers to provide essentially a safe workplace. Hence, it's important to acknowledge that aspect, especially when you go about your risk management strategies. What these regulations essentially do, they kind of give you more prescriptive risk management support requirements and strategies in terms of how do you then achieve that psychological health and safety in the workplace. By now, we are aware when these regulations are coming in force, which is 1st of December 2025, and there are enforceable duties under the Act as well as the regulation itself. Now, like I said, psychological health has been always defined within the Act itself under Section 5. What the regulation again does is expands what psychological health means. So the compliance code that supports and complements the Act would then go defining and describing what employers can do in terms of achieving that psychological health and safety risk management strategies. Yeah. It's very important before applying strategies, defining the scope, defining what those hazards are, because that would give you clarity around what the risk is present through those hazards. So it's important to distinguish between each of those psychosocial hazards. The most common that you would come across is bullying and harassment. But there is a subtle distinction between bullying and harassment, one of them being more of a repeated nature of behavior versus harassment being one of. Again, you would see the value of definitions, which the Act and the Compliance Code, and in fact the regulations, do provide. And that definition would assist a lot when you are probing a system, especially when you're investigating. How do you differentiate between lack of role clarity versus work overload, workload factors? So again, the overview of what psychosocial hazard is nicely defined within Reg 4 of what it means. Essentially, it's that entire system of work, how work activities are carried out, and then goes on to connect it with the psychological response certain activities and tasks or experiences may create. You would see and you would hear a lot around the word systems. Now, a system is essentially anything, right? So anything which involves human beings, it's a socio-technical framework. So essentially human involvement, the social element, but also your technological factors in your workplace, which could be your digital technology, but also your old school machinery, plants, equipment that assist you in achieving an outcome operationally. And it's those factors that then contribute to physical harm or psychological harm. So again, the value in understanding definitions around these important aspects of the risk management strategy. Again, important for me to point out, you may not find the definition of systems the way it is here in the regulations. The code, the compliance code does expand on what system means, but it absolutely tells you about what a system is not by itself. So policies and procedures by itself are not systems. If anything, they are aspects of that system, and they more sit in an administrative level compliance. They're absolutely important. You need those documents, processes, on paper to ensure consistency. However, by themselves, they will not count as a system. Now, again, a few more definitions there and also a few examples of what those psychosocial hazards are They sit within the regulations, but of course do take advantage of the compliance code to provide you that context. Again, it's important to understand what those psychosocial hazards are. With so much of conversation around psychosocial hazards, it's easy to kind of get sidetracked with or kind of get overloaded with information of what each of those hazards are. The moment you identify all of those 16 to 17 hazards, I generally class them into behavioral and work factors. So there are about 4 or 5 behavioral hazards, call them bullying, harassment, sexual harassment, occupational violence and aggression, discrimination, and things beyond that are your work factors, workload, lack of role clarity, your remote work. So those are those hazards. Your old school way of assessing, or rather the conventional way of assessing OHS hazards, start with your hazard and that hazard creating a level of risk which could expose an employee to harm is the way you would think. However, when you are approaching psychosocial hazards, there may be a little different approach you may take. So it's defined as hazards, and a lot of time you'd see interchangeable terms used, hazard versus risk. So you might end up calling something a psychosocial risk versus a psychosocial hazard. Either way, have visibility of those 14 to 16 psychosocial hazards. That would give you a clarity in direction with your risk strategy. So the strategy you may have around bullying versus how you tackle workloads would be slightly different. Yeah, and again, a last very important point is it covers employees and independent contractors. So be mindful of that, because employees, yes, of course, they are within your management and control to a certain extent in terms of the support you provide to them and the influence you may have over them in terms of achieving your safety outcomes, versus independent contractors. They could be a little slightly disconnected from your system. Yeah. Again, why all of this matters goes without saying. At the top of that list should be employee, worker health and safety. But there are a few other aspects which makes this entire psychological health and safety piece more crucial and important. There is an increasing scrutiny from the regulator. Of course, you've got the introduction of the regulations coming in December. However, through existing information, which you would see in following slides, there is enough information and it's timely to take action around psychological health and safety, which is around, say, the incidents in the industry. Your claims data would reflect all of that. And it matters to businesses most importantly because there are risks beyond your health and safety risk, which is business or operational risks, reputational risks to business leaders. Large organizations, complex operations, how do you have an overview of what's happening on the ground? So that risk management approach gives leaders that visibility to foresee any enforceable activities that they may be exposed to. So hence, quite an important piece here. Prior to the release of the psychosocial regulations or the announcement, there was an announcement around WorkSafe Victoria's strategic intent. And again, I think I'll be mindful here because we may have audience from across the country. And irrespective of what WorkSafe Victoria's intent is, the strategy I've seen from experience across different regulators is quite similar. Again, the intention of any regulator is to bring down fatalities, be it through physical or psychological health and safety risks, but also bring down your serious injuries. So what WorkSafe is targeting is 30% reduction in deaths by 30% and reduction in serious injuries by 20%. Again, when you talk about psychological health, we need to get ourselves ready with conversations around what are we trying to avoid here. So essentially, when you talk physical health and safety, you're trying to avoid fatalities. When you start talking about psychological health and safety, we need to be clear we're trying to avoid fatalities, but also suicides. So that gives you that human perspective of how valuable these strategies are. Again, WorkSafe, through its intent, have identified certain sectors, or more, you could classify them as high-risk sectors. Not to say that the efforts put in by employees, leadership, managers within these sectors is wasted. It's just that due to the nature of inherent risk in these industries and the complexities attached to them, they become more vulnerable. So hence, there are a couple of physical health and safety concerns that we've seen in these industries, in fact, across all industries, from working at heights, your musculoskeletal disorders coming through your hazardous manual handling, your dangerous goods and chemicals. In all of that complexity, attach the psychosocial hazard aspect. And that's definitely under focus, given what we have seen so far through all the data. So again, so the highlight's going to be around psychosocial hazards too, while keeping a system perspective on all the other physical hazards. Now, the important bit is around the duties. Now, nothing has changed. If you are familiar with the Health and Safety Act, be it the WHS approach or the OHS Act here in Victoria, it's always been around identifying hazards, controlling risks. The review of controls, especially in Victoria, is more connected with your hazardous manual handling so far, but now that's a little different. That's the difference psychological health and safety has versus all the other risk management strategies you apply to other risks. So what that means is goes without saying, you apply your reasonable efforts to identify those hazards and control those risks. Of course, you want to eliminate them. If that's not possible, which is more than often the case, you want to reduce that risk. We'll talk more in the further slides. We'll talk about the hierarchy of controls and what reasonable effort means or looks like. Right. But review of control is an important element of the psychological health and safety risk management strategy, which essentially means that if you are made aware of if you're made aware of hazards or risks connected to psychological hazards or psych hazards, this could be through reported incidents, this could be through HSR requests, you are obliged to go back to the drawing board and review your risk assessments or your risk controls. Now, you would have heard through the announcement that the prevention plans are not mandatory. However, it is important to understand when you come to reviewing and revising, if required, your risk controls around psychosocial hazards, then you'd have to start from somewhere, which essentially is you're going back to review what you already have in place. So if you haven't documented your initial baseline psychosocial hazards and the risk controls attached to them, then there is nothing going back to. So what I'm trying to say here is that you need to start off, irrespective of the prevention plan being mandatory or not. The best practice would be, and which is what the compliance code talks to, the larger piece in the compliance code for the psych hazards is around risk management strategies. So you might as well have a baseline check of your organization. It's like a stress test for your organization in terms of where do we sit in terms of risk controls for all of these 16 to 17 psychosocial hazards. So when time comes to review them, when there are situations when you're required to review them under Reg 16, you already have a baseline which you can then go and probe and see was it effective or not, was it implemented or not, and then you can make changes and revise those risk controls if necessary. Yeah. Now, the efforts that you apply to risk management strategies at some point need to have some context, need to have some way you can quantify it. Easier said than done again, acknowledge that. However, how reasonable are your efforts is important. And the OHS Act does talk to it. It clearly describes these CHOP factors. And again, it's a borrowed acronym I have, not sure from where it's come. But essentially, there are these 4 to 5 factors that allow you to understand that your efforts in controlling a risk are sufficient. And to complement this, you would use a hierarchy of control. So you want to put the best level of controls, ideally eliminate the entire risk and hazard, but if you cannot, then you approach it from this perspective: cost, harm, availability of and suitability of the control measures available, the likelihood of that risk eventuating, but also the knowledge you have or you ought to have. Not knowing doesn't indemnify you from controlling a risk. So the obligation is on employers to actually understand, engage expertise internally, externally, to appreciate, acknowledge, and control the risk. don't shy away from the cost, because the cost factor is not to say that if it's expensive, you would not control the risk, rather to say that if you're pouring in resources in controlling a risk and the risk profile is not changing, essentially not reducing the level of risk, then any amount of resources after a point is wasted. So you rather than channel your resources towards the right risk control strategy. So that's where the cost aspect is important, and the Act also acknowledges that. Yeah. Now, what ties up the entire risk management strategy is your consultation and issue resolution. You need to, my strong recommendation is to have an internal process that is so robust and it's connected to psychological safety, meaning employees, workers, even contractors are comfortable and respectfully raising health and safety concerns, because that's valuable data internally. In the absence of an internal consultation or an issue resolution process, the regulation does cater to that. There are a set of regulations that would assist employers who do not have an internal issue resolution procedure, and that's what you'd be expected to comply with. But from experience and practically, I feel you lose a little control in terms of governing your issue resolution process. So again, the recommendation is to have an internal issue resolution process talking to either all of those psychosocial hazards or even the individual ones, because individual psychosocial hazards, for example, OVA, occupational violence and aggression versus bullying, and how issues are resolved around them could be different. So when you have your own internal process, you can review it, you can control it, you can use it in a way that's more suited for your organization. But again, if you do not have that process, or if it's inadequate, the inspectors, when they have this conversation with you, they would then expect you to have something as a baseline, which is defined under Part 3, Regs 10 and 13 of the psychological health regulations. Yeah. Now, this is the important bit in terms of how you start engaging with the regulator. So it's either through a proactive inspections or response. Now, I'll talk about a proactive first. The proactive, again, is based on industry data, concerns that the regulator may have, which are visible through your claims data, through serious incidents or past prosecutions, essentially inherent risks in certain industries. So that triggers targeted project inspections that inspectors from WorkSafe would conduct in those industries. Now again, these projects may even be targeting physical hazards, like say your hazardous manual handling or manufacturing targeted project visits, where they're more looking at plants and equipment or large chemical storage facilities. However, I've seen it from experience, again, with the regs coming in, there would definitely be an advantage for the regulator to have a psychosocial element in those inspections. Meaning, when they're probing a system for all the physical hazards, there will absolutely be a conversation around what is your psychosocial risk management strategy. And through that, they can absolutely probe your incident management systems, be it HR or OHS systems, to see the level of risk existing through incidents or reported alleged psychosocial hazards. And I say alleged because the behavioral concerns raised, I do not like, and neither does the regulator, I've seen from experience, class them as incidents. They class them as allegations, because there is always a complainant and there could be alleged respondents. So to make it fair, the terminology also, the definitions go a long way. Again, that's proactive. Now, response is again very important. Now, how do response visits come about is through notifiable incidents, which generally are more physical incidents in nature. However, they could have elements of workload, fatigue, and those aspects. So then, through the triaging process internally at, say, the WorkSafe or any other regulator across the country would mean conversations around existence of your psychosocial hazards. A lot of concerns, a lot of response visit in my experience have come about through employees raising concerns with the regulator around concerns around bullying, harassment, sexual harassment, or exposure to violence and aggression, and also fatigue in certain industries. Now, the question there the regulator has, and in fact I would have for employers, is that what's taking an employee away from that organizational system and then use the regulator. In many situations, the employees either are not comfortable having those conversations internally with the supervisors, managers, through their process. That's when they're seeking help externally, and which is good to have. But however, the question for employers is that do we have psychological safety within our system where employees can raise concerns with us through that consultation piece. So consultation around policies and procedures is one thing, but that moving or the fluid consultation you would have is when employees or workers or contractors are faced with unsafe situations. Are they able to raise it? So do we have a system that's technically sound, but also do we have a culture through which they are comfortable raising these concerns? So if they're not, then they're reaching out to the regulator. So you might as well have a robust internal system, take advantage of the feedback employees are giving to then probe your systems and see if that risk exists or not, or if it's just a perception that a certain employee has. So the support you provide them through that incident or hazard raising process would go a long way in improving your own system. Again, important, what all of this distills to through your regulatory interventions, through your response or proactive inspections. If gaps are identified in your system, that would mean that there are certain contraventions with specific sections of the Act. More than often, you'd see contraventions connected to Section 21 here in Victoria, which basically means you either as an employer are required to provide a safe system of work, and if you haven't provided, you'd be given improvement notices around providing a safe system of work or providing an adequate system of work. But in most of the situations, the systems provided are not maintained, they're not implemented correctly. Hence, you'd end up seeing a lot of enforcement activities around lack of maintenance of that system. One classic example is you've got an amazing system around policies, procedures around what occupation violence and aggression is, what bullying is. However, when issues are raised through your incident management systems, again, from experience, this is not to say it's across the board, but I would be talking to the gaps I've seen is around how effectively these allegations or incidents have been investigated. And those are the points where your system would be tested. These are the crucial points where your system will be tested by the regulator in terms of its effectiveness. So how employees...
Well, I think at that point, maybe what I might do is move across to Arthur to give him a chance to talk to the control of risk management and that WorkSafe project so that we can then answer some of these in the question time. So
absolutely.
All right. Thank you, Dawal.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah.
Apologies, Arthur. I'm pushing you a little bit, but just to make sure we've got enough time for the audience to also be able to get through some of this content and to Q&A. Can I hand over to you?
Wonderful. Thanks, Keith, and Dawal as well for that comprehensive presentation as well. Arthur Papagiannis, founder and CEO of AP Psychology and Consulting Services. And really what I want to do here is bring some of this to life. What does it look like? We've been doing this for over 16 years, been in this space for over 25 years. We've learned a lot as a consulting business over the course of this journey. And worked across large-scale organisations right through to setting up foundations around transport logistics space to individual organisations, small organisations, national to global as well within that. But what Dawal has shared and Rick earlier on, all of the things we're talking about are applicable across small, medium and large. The frameworks, the models, the processes are the same. Maybe the depth or the analysis might look a little different. So really want to bring that to life in stepping through some examples, case scenarios, and equally a program that small to medium-sized businesses can be eligible for. We've heard a lot around the why. so I don't really want to go harping on that, but there's some key things we really want to drive here. Fundamentally, we want to make sure our people are going home safe every single day. The work can be a protective factor for our people. And if there's challenges happening outside of work, the workplace can serve as that protective environment. So what are the things we could be doing to protect our people? And clearly the regs are coming into play, the codes, and this has been happening across the country. I mean, we've been doing this with other parts of Australia as well, going back to 221, but even pre some of these codes of practice that have been rolled. And fundamentally, they're all similar in many ways. The hazards we're talking about are all the same. And whenever I do this, we all know what our hazards are. Whenever I go into any workplace and I say, what are your challenges when you're thinking about psychosocial hazards? Everyone can list them. Now it's being documented. We've got the codes of practice, the codes, and it's the how-to. The great thing is today, we're able to grab that code and go, hey, what am I actually meant to be doing under this? What am I meant to be doing when we're talking about hazards and risks related to psychological components of what could be impacting our people? And clearly there's big benefits. I mean, if we get this right, and we've seen it, and you'll see a case study, and I'll share that, we'll see increased employment engagement, presenteeism. Rick spoke to that. If people are struggling, how present are they day to day? Are they operating at 10%, 20%, 30%? If we're creating that right environment, clearly that enhances presenteeism. People are performing at their optimum. It means they're able to be more creative, less likely to have incidents, not poor decision-making, judgment, which can compromise the way they go about doing their work. And ultimately, reduce mental health concerns. And as Dewal mentioned, possible, and we've seen this in some cases that have played out, suicide. I mean, that's the extreme end of this, but clearly we're mitigating a lot of this. So it's in our best interest, and it's good for all and good for community. Now, Dewal spoke to this a tad earlier as well, and I just want to step through this a little bit. There's 4 key steps we really need to be thinking about when we're assessing psychosocial hazards, and also considering the risk to that hazard. And again, Dewal, you were talking about that system. It's not as simple. A doesn't equal B, especially when it comes to psychological risks. It's often A equals C, D, E, F, G, and H within that. And just to give a working example, if we look at step 1, it's got a hazard. And just to help people understand, how do we navigate through this? So a staircase is a hazard. Work demands are a hazard. What actually increases the risk to the hazard of a staircase? We would say handrail missing, steps, lighting. Then we start to move into things that are being asked for, around psychosocial hazards, but equally with physical. Frequency, duration. How often is the staircase being used? Is it being used once every 3 years? Or is it being used every day, every moment in time? So the more the frequency and duration coupled with all those other things I shared, rails, lighting, are missing, the risk increases. Let's look at that and apply that through a work demands or work pressure kind of lens. It's equally the same. Work demands could be a hazard, but what actually increases the risk associated with that? Maybe shortage in resourcing. That's the first thing we often jump to. First and foremost, we need more resourcing, but there's a bunch of other things connected to all of that. Do I feel supported by my leader? Can I have a conversation with my leader? Have I been trained to be able to manage and prioritize tasks? Are there clear policies and processes in place for work demands? Are there the right systems and ways to support the way we go about doing our work? Is there consultation in how we navigate through our work demands? So you can see here the risk increases when we have more of those areas missing. So when we look at work demands, I hear it over and over again, because that's one of the most common ones that gets raised in the work that we do. People gravitate to resource. Sometimes there isn't budget, but there's a bunch of other levers we can start to pull. Because think of work demands, not only resourcing missing, can't go to my leader, I don't feel psychologically safe, and Dewal was talking to some of that. We're not even looking at the systems and the way we go about managing that. I don't have good role clarity in the way I'm going about doing things. So we can see the risk significantly increases. So this is a really good way for us to think about psychosocial hazards and how we assess the risk connected to that. And we are looking at things around frequency, duration, and then ultimately impact, because that is a big part. I could be busy for one day, but then it dissipates. So that might be fine, or a few days or a week. But if it's 6 months and I'm operating at 9 out of 10, there's a bunch of those things I highlighted earlier, then that's going to become quite problematic. And as an organisation, we need to be tackling that, and we need to be making sure we're consulting with our people. So if we go to the next slide, what does that actually look like in practicality? Well, WorkSafe's recognised 16 psychosocial hazards, or 16 or 17, and could be 18 as well, depending on your industry. But we've got the fundamental ones, and they're fairly consistent across the country as well. Yes, there's slight nuances, some bits have been pulled out, but we're ultimately pretty clear on what these hazards are. And you'll see on the left-hand side there, these are the hazards that are listed in the codes, okay, which is a really great starting point. This is what we want to be looking at in our workplace. Now, there's a bunch of ways you can do this. There's psychosocial risk assessments that can be conducted. We've got our own that's mapped to these hazards, and I'll talk to that through the Mentally Healthy Workplaces program as well. That's one measure. That's a survey of some sort. You're going out. But there's a bunch of other things we also want to be capturing within that. I want to be conducting a bit of a gap analysis. And some of these things were touched on earlier. Absenteeism, workers' comp claims, EAP data within that, policies, procedures, maturity of those. What do we have? What don't we have within that? Coupled with, we want to validate this. So we've now got a survey. We've done a gap analysis. We want to make sure we're consulting with our people. You'll often find 2 or 3 hazards get highlighted typically and identified as risk. So we want to move into consulting with our people. We want to understand, what does that actually look like? And if we think about things like workload, that'll look different across different departments, areas, industries, and the likes. But that's what we want to understand. So that consultation piece becomes critical to help validate what we're identifying and seeing within the workplace. So you'll see those first 2 pillars really lean into the identification and the assessment piece. That's what we want to be doing as an organisation. Then we want to move into implementing the controls. And this is where it often gets trickier. And I'll build on the previous slide that I shared, because it is quite dynamic. Now we've got the ways of working, management of work systems that WorkSafe's highlighted. We like to use a framework which is fairly similar in nature, but when you're thinking about controls, you need to think about them through an integrated lens. And a really helpful way is to think about work design clearly, systems, management of work. That all sits in that smarter work. We need to be thinking about culture. What is the culture around all of this? Leadership becomes key. If you look at those top 3 areas there, they're your preventative areas. And you can see the code has really drifted into that space. We've spent a number of years. If I go back to 1999 when I was doing this, I was presenting and talking about why mental health is important. So we've come bottom up. We've spent a lot of time in that support recovery. If you even think about EAPs, support recovery, something happened to somebody, we would then say, hey, access counselling. Now it's moved into, early intervention a bit more. They offer other things. We've got mental health first aid. So those early interventions are your protective areas, secondary levels of intervention, your support recovery is your tertiary. What we're trying to focus on really, and the shift that's happening across the country, is really looking at culture, work design in particular, systems management. That's a big focus. How do we get better and stronger at that? And leadership contribution to all of that at an organisation, individual leadership as well. And I'm going to do a working example which can really set you on the right pathway to think about how you can apply this kind of thinking. As we use that framework, that helps you move to the action planning, which has already been spoken to. So we do an assessment, we've done a gap analysis, we've consulted with our people, we understand our inherent risks. You'll usually find a couple within that probably need a level of attention. Some might need more, depending on the industry as well. When we move to the controls, you really want to take that integrated approach. And you can see those 7 workplace focus areas can really help you do that, which helps you formulate your action plan, which allows you to go through that review process at some point in time. So if we look at a practical application of this, I'll use job demands as the one. There we've got occupational violence, inappropriate workplace behaviours. It could be change management, whatever that risk is. So what do? We've identified now, we've done an assessment, we've identified that job demands is a risk through that process, our consultation, and we're moving towards controls. We're thinking about what are the controls we can put in place. If I ever start a process of looking at the controls, the first response is, all right, we need an extra 20 people to help us with this. And organisation says, but we've got no budget around that. Now, resourcing is important. We want to focus on that, but sometimes we can get so stuck on that we lose sight of the other things that we could be doing to minimise that risk or eliminate it, as it's been shared. But sometimes we're trying to reduce that risk. So if I look at job demands, I'm starting to ask leadership commitment around this. I'm going, what's leadership commitment around job demands, managing that, expectations, ownership and engagement? And I use work design mindset of leadership. Do leaders actually, at 101, know how to have a work design conversation? And you'd be surprised, because I've run multiple workshops and I'll say, someone comes to you, has anyone heard this? They go to the leader, I've got too much on, and the leader responds with, that's just how it is here. That's not a work design mindset. Good approach to that is leader going, hey, let's talk through that. What's going on? That's the consultation piece. What are the pain points? What's the pressure? What's going on for you? Is this broader? Is this team as well? Or is it just you as an individual? What are the systems? This is how do we really get that strong commitment from leadership in helping navigate through that? So that's around job demands. I'm working through each of these. We've got good behavioural expectations. Are there broader leadership capabilities around this? Do leaders know how to lead through psychological health and safety? Are they familiar with the codes? What the expectations are, how they navigate through all of this? This really lays the foundation, because that's where we need that commitment from leadership by the organisation, and it helps us tackle job demands. Then we start to move into things like culture. Do I feel psychologically safe to say I've got too much on? Or am I going to hear, that's just how it is here? So that's that cultural piece of safety. Am I creating that? Are there, good policies, procedures in place? Are we helping navigate through change effectively? And are those things contributing to the demands of work? Have we got team-based training, interventions? These are just examples. Then we move into the work component, the design, the systems, the management of that. And that's multi-layered. That's where the bulk of that work kind of gets done, where you start to look, is there good role clarity for individuals? Is there good decision-making? Approaches in all of this? Am I trained effectively on the systems and processes that I need to be using? Am I, are there flaws in the systems as well that we need to be thinking about there? So that's that work design piece that was clearly highlighted, and you can see through the codes as well. That's the prevention piece. We're going to protection. Then I'm going, job demands, evidence-based training. What do we mean here? Under that building resiliency and coping. I have high workload. Delivering a wellbeing program is not going to cut it. Yes, it's not saying it's not a good thing, but I might need specific training that might be on a system, a database, a way of doing something to help me also maybe look at how I prioritize things. I'm linking that training to the hazard or the risk. So if it's, occupational violence, for example, if that's the risk, the training would be, how do I have challenging interactions and conversations? I'm targeting that training to make sure our people are skilled, but not in and of its own. I need all the other things to be happening as well. Coaching, mentoring around high job demands. Then we go into early interventions. Wellbeing checks, are leaders checking with their people on the demands of work, if that's actually the case? Is that happening weekly? Are we consulting within our teams? Understanding what needs to shift, what do we need to reprioritise? Are we putting the right supports in place? Are we giving people additional supports? Because it could be job demands coupled with personal things that could be going on for people. You can see how dynamic this is. It's not one thing. So I'm trying to use, we use this framework to make sure we're capturing everything and don't fall short. Then we're going to support recovery. If someone is impacted, how are we supporting them effectively? So you can see here, by using a framework like this, you've got it takes a real integrated approach to it, and it stops you falling into this lens of, or trap of high job demands. Let's just give people some training on how to manage workload. That's going to fall flat. We know that, and that's actually going to become a big problem. But what we're doing here, high job demands, and I'm going through all of these focus areas to go, what are the possible controls we could be considering under each of these? And that helps us take a more integrated and fuller approach to all of this. And you've got the codes as well, which I think are fabulous, because it's actually giving us the manual. It's giving us the guides. Let's go through this. We're talking about workload. Hey, open up the guide, and it's going to give you some good examples and populate them, fill them out. So I just want to step through a bit of an example, because I know people get overwhelmed by this.
Arthur, I'm going to ask you to be agile here with me.
Yes.
Because we've got a flood of questions that are coming through from the audience. If I skip the work example to go straight to the mentally healthy workplaces to allow you to go through that quickly, we might start the Q&A a little bit earlier. So apologies,
no
but I'm just going to move through.
Thank you, Keith. And I was going to suggest jump straight to the mentally healthy workplaces program. Now, the great thing is there's support out there for you. A recent initiative that's funded through WorkSafe, and which we're delivering on behalf of and in partnership with the Victorian Chambers of Commerce, is a free psychosocial risk management program for all Victorian small and medium-sized businesses. And just to step through a little bit of that program, the aim is to make sure we're preventing mental injury before it happens. It's helping tackle psychosocial risks with some practical tools and strategies, and overall helping create healthy and safer work environments over the next 12 months. And we're targeting 300 small to medium-sized businesses. If you can just go to the next slide. Now, the eligibility for this is we wanted to make this accessible and easy for small to medium-sized businesses. So there's not a lot of hoops you need to jump. One is, though, you need to have under 200 employees and be based in Victoria. You need to hold a current work cover policy within Victoria, and the workers need to be located in Victoria as well, and have a low maturity in workplace psychosocial safety as well. So the screening process is relatively straightforward to go into the next phase of the process of assessing eligibility. And government departments and agencies are not eligible for this particular program. And if we just move to the next slide, what do you get for that program? And I think there's great value. Everything we've been covering today is what you ultimately get. You get a dedicated consultant from our business who support you through the life of the program. You'll get access to our TM Thrive digital platform, which has a psychosocial risk assessment housed in it. And you'll get your own insights, profile and controls, and a bunch of learning content to support. We've got our validated workplace psychosocial safety index, which is aligned with ISO 45003 and also with the WorkSafe codes. So those hazards I shared is what the platform's built around, and that's what we're rolling out across Victoria to support those small to medium-sized businesses in being able to assess those hazards and move towards action planning. Through that identification, we go through a code design piece and safety action plan. So we work with the small to medium-sized business in designing their controls based on their profiles, and we'll have conducted a gap analysis within that as well. And we curate a bunch of learning modules off the back of that based on the risk profile. So if there are things around OVA, behaviours, we've got micro-learning videos, e-learns, and a bunch of other support resources to support the organisations to go on that journey. And over the 12 months, there's ongoing consultation as well. So it's a really comprehensive program. Strongly encourage, if you are under 200 and thinking about what are some of those next steps, I think this is a great way forward to, start that journey if you haven't. Or build on what you've already done. And this really maps out a bit of a timeline around that. And I shared that in the previous slide. There's an initial virtual meeting, program introduction, induction, then you move into the psychosocial risk assessment, which takes over a couple of weeks. And then we move into the gap analysis. We kind of do those hand in hand as we're going through that process. Once we collate the reporting of the safety index plus the gap analysis, we're moving to some consultation, and you can see it fits very well into that 4-step process of risk. And we go into a discovery session to collaboratively co-design the controls. And we've got our registered psychologists supporting that process. So we're supporting businesses to implement those controls to help execute on an action plan. That action plan is then supported ongoingly over a 9-month period with quarterly check-ins, progress, and the platform allows for that as well, plus a bunch of learning material. So strongly encourage people to, sign up. We're going to share that information shortly as well. And you can probably move to that next slide. Sorry, we might go to the following one, if that's okay. Where you can see the QR code there around the mentally healthy workplaces. Equally, there's a bunch of information on our website, which you can see there as well, AP Psychology and Consulting Services. And you get copies of these slides, I believe, post-session, and Keith will talk to some of that. But for those organisations that don't necessarily meet the requirements, under Victoria, there's opportunity to have conversations with us on looking at what that might look like for your organisation as well. Because I'm sure there's people from other jurisdictions coupled with size across the country as well. So I'm hoping you've taken something of value out of this and looking forward to moving into some of the Q&A. So I might hand over to you, Keith.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Arthur. And thank you. I'm going to bring back Dawal as well. For the audience, a reminder, you can use the Q&A function to drop your questions in. And I'm going to start putting our 2 experts under the gun here now with some of our queries coming through. 2 questions I think I can knock off pretty easily. Yes, the slides and resources will be circulated after today's session, and that includes some of the templates that you saw in Arthur's work as well. I think the first one is maybe one directed at Dawal. Dawal, are there specialist WorkSafe inspectors who are psychosocial professionals, or are they just current inspectors with some training in how to identify psychosocial risk?
Yeah, so absolutely. So there are 3 layers the regulator, especially WorkSafe Victoria, has. One is generalist multidisciplinary inspectors. They inspect anything and everything, guarding, plant guarding, physical, but also they're trained to a certain level to identify or rather use the WorkSafe framework to probe systems rather than the risk or the harm, which again is left to the expert psychologist. Then there is a second layer, which is a psychosocial inspectorate, which again probes just psychosocial risks from the psychosocial perspective. However, they still have a context around the physical risk perspective. They have that. The third layer is a psychological. It's a long term, but I'll try and get it right. But it's PHU, Psychological Health Unit, where they've got organizational psychologists, and of course they have the credentials and qualifications required by the industry. So they are tapped into for the high risk situations, but also to articulate the risk better than say a generalist would be able to probe. And again, when you look at the factors, there are behavioral factors, but there are also the work factors, right? So the work factors are more than often operational in nature. So I would expect even the engineers in a workplace to appreciate workloads, fatigue levels, and those aspects. So hence,
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thanks, Dawal. Arthur, there's one that's come up specifically. So Duncan is asking, how can a small business who operates in Victoria with an EML policy get support in the new legislation? So when we send out the slide deck, it's as simple as scanning the QR code to get access through. All right. And anyone else can just reach out to you, I guess, via AP Psychology to ask any queries that they might have about that program.
That's right. Yeah, so they could go straight to the QR code. That'll take them to the Mentally Healthy Workplaces program. Or if they just want to engage with us initially and have a conversation, directly reach out.
Okay. Arthur, I might pose this one to you. This is a follow-up. Is there guidance, or at least from your professional experience, at what point a psychological injury becomes work-related? Or do you have an inference where you go, here where the obligations that in the new regs occurs, but if a HR investigation is not substantiating the claim, you still have a psychological risk to deal with? Would you mind answering that?
Yeah, I mean, that's the complexity in this space. What I always suggest to workplaces is making sure you're doing with what's in your control to make sure you're creating that psychologically healthy and safe work environment. That is conducting the assessments, that is doing the gap analysis, that is doing all the things we've been talking about today. Now, people bring a whole bunch of things into the workplace as well. So we need to make sure from a workplace perspective, we're meeting all of those requirements, and we're making sure we're creating that environment for them to be their best coming in every single day. That will allow workplaces then to work through any more nuanced situations which may have a level of complexity connected to it, which may be entangled, or it could be a possible contribution from a workplace or personal. But where it gets really unstuck is when there isn't anything in the workplace and you have the other complexities there. And I know I'm not giving a straightforward answer, because I don't believe it is a straightforward answer.
I think, look, while you pointed out earlier on when you referred to the grievance process and issue resolution process, that one of the things that WorkSafe will be asking for when they come in is, what are the processes that you have, and have you followed those processes first? I think is the first question. In your experience, when you look at a business that's undertaking or has undertaken a HR investigation, has been unable to substantiate claims, given that sometimes might follow Fair Work Act principles or industrial relations principles, do you think there's still residual risk for an employer to manage?
Absolutely. So I've got two classic examples. So look at bullying complaints and OVA. Looking at bullying first, more than often the conversations or the dispute in agreement is around work activity. If the conversation and the bullying has resulted from a non-work activity, then there's probably nothing much to look at. One classic example was a conversation between a supervisor and an employee on board a ship in Victoria that led to repeated such behavior that was perceived as bullying. So there were signs of lack of role clarity, lack of job description, and also the misuse of the imbalance of power between a supervisor and the manager. And this employer addressed it very well. They fixed the system also. Whilst they couldn't really substantiate the claim, they fixed the system in terms of that SOP process and how work's done on a ship when it comes into port. So it reduces that friction between individuals. Yeah.
Brilliant. Arthur, can I ask, we are living in a world of hybrid work. We know sometimes that workplaces might now be where employees are working from home part-time, and in some cases even full-time. So Rachel's asked, do you have any advice when you're thinking about your risk control framework for how employers need to consider their obligations for people working from home, and what type of controls would be appropriate?
Yeah, I mean, I would consider applying the same 7 workplace focus areas. So clearly, people are working from home. You would conduct a hazard assessment, assess some of those risks, but then that's why that consultation becomes so important, because we want to profile that. What does it look different to a work office environment, to a home, to a remote location? Those 7 focus areas can be really helpful in then going, what does it look like from a working from home perspective? Leadership might look a bit different to what it does day to day in the office, maybe. Psychological safety, what are those work design systems, management processes that need to be considered given people are working from home? Does it look the same as an office setting or a work environment? What is the coping and training and skills that people need? So you can see that framework can always be applied no matter what the context is, because it's helping you isolate it to that work environment or that consideration.
And I think the one other thing that you talked to earlier on was the standard, like through your approaches, is the standard quality of training for line managers. Because I think one of the really big important aspects of what you just described there, Arthur, is the consultation with a worker to know what do they deem to be suitable leadership principles, what do they deem to be suitable support and controls. So that becomes very, very important. So I really appreciate that. Next question from Natalie. What do you see to be the differences between an investigation into psychosocial allegations through a P&P lens versus an OHS lens? And how does the change in obligation alter this lens in practice? Maybe I might turn to Dewal just on that one, given that you brought up P&P as part of your presentation. Do you think that an investigation into a HR allegation needs to have 2 different lenses, or is it the same lens, same approach?
I'm more inclined towards saying there is a point where you need to have a slightly different approach because of the privacy and confidentiality nature of certain allegations. But if it's completely just work factors, there's no complainant involved. There's a complainant involved, but no alleged respondent. It's easier to then apply seamlessly your OHS lens. But whenever there is a complainant, alleged respondent, you need to maintain the privacy and confidentiality. And also, how do you tackle consultation with HSRs, right? Because without exposing them to that harm, but also then maintaining privacy. So absolutely, it's again case to case. It's quite complex, not as straightforward as plant guarding or manual handling issues, but yeah, there needs to be separate approaches.
And if I
All
could
right.
just, can I just
Yeah,
add
please, Arthur.
something to that, just as you were talking to this, and it's become, I'm noticing it more and more in workplaces. So historically, we've had a lot of, OH&S, P&C, that cross-functional leadership or connection between all of those functions is where workplaces are doing it well. P&C, employment relations, OH&S, learning and development, coming together going, what does this actually all look like? And the elements, as you've shared, that are around privacy. But I think the future is, and the strength is the cross collaboration between these, that's where it's heading. And workplaces thinking that way from now. How do we start to move in that direction?
For everyone in the audience, because I still have a flood of questions coming through, I'm going to be extending our webinar, making an executive decision through till 10:40. I'm just going to ask a couple more questions. Everything else we'll take on notice, and as part of our closeout, we will respond to in writing for the group. Reminder again, we are providing a recording of this webinar, and we are providing the slides from both Arthur and Dewal for you as well. So next question, how does an employee perception factor into reasonable workload? For instance, you generally see a claim arise for workload pressures from an employee who is underperforming and who may have a lessened workload or additional support, admin support delegation of cases, or more frequent management discussions to try and help them achieve their KPIs, but they still continue to report psychological stress due to workload pressures. Maybe Arthur, I might turn to you on that one. When you have a worker that's reporting that they feel that they're dealing with unreasonable workload, what is the type of guidance that you offer to some of your clients for how to manage those perceptions if they are also providing relevant support?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question, one that comes up quite often. And I know I'm going to go back to the 7 focus areas because it becomes a good anchor point. It becomes a good anchor point to look at all the dimensions of that when you're working through an issue like that. Because you do have perception, that's one, but then there's expectations of role, procedures, performance expectations that sit within that. What is the support mechanism from leadership around that? How are they recognizing, identifying and putting things in place sooner rather than, because everyone is different and everyone can tolerate and do things in different ways. And I think it's that front-end preventative approach to make sure those systems are set up right to give leaders and the employee the best opportunity to be able to work through that perception of workload. When we don't have those things, you don't have an anchor point. You don't have a marker, which then makes it very hard to be able to navigate that, both from an employee standpoint, equally a leader around that. And that's often what we're assessing. Again, what are all the controls and mechanisms you have in place across all of those 7 areas? And that usually then highlights whether there is a gap or not, or things they need to be thinking about. But well, you might have a different.
No, I absolutely agree, and it's setting expectations, but also when perception, even in case of physical health and safety, it could still be a perception that I need higher level of risk controls. But having a higher level of risk controls may mean cost and not changing the risk profile. So it's important to understand perception needs to be acknowledged, irrespective of that being for one or hundreds of them. But if that's going to cause real harm, so if the consequence is going to be real, irrespective of that being a perception, it needs to be controlled. The risk needs to be controlled.
Dewal, following on from this concept of perception, AJ has asked, noting the subjective nature of workplace controls, how would you measure objectively the outcome of placing controls in the workplace? Do you have some feedback on that?
Absolutely. Again, we'd probably need probably an hour or two to kind of break down each of those. But I'm sure, and I've seen from experience and operational experience, you've got ERP systems that talk to a lot of the work factors, right? Then that feeds into a clarity around role clarities, especially start from your critical operations. That's something that's going to cost you money. Business decisions would be impacted, but also health and safety would be one crucial critical element of that risk assessment. So if anything, any aspect of that is impacted, it would derail the entire operation. So use your existing systems, your ERP systems, your accounting system that would talk to workloads, that would talk to the complexity of your operations. That's where you can start measuring. It could be difficult to class it as qualitative or quantitative, but that's the point you start. Pick your 14 or 16 psychosocial hazards and see how you can quantify it with your existing operation systems.
Okay, I'm feeling a bit left out, so I'm going to answer one myself. Renee has asked, will WorkSafe inspectors be issuing improvement notices around psychosocial issues straight away, or will there be an adjustment or grace period? Renee, I can confirm that as per the guidance being issued in October, there is no grace period. The regulations take effect from the 1st of December. So if on that day you do not have your risks identified, you do not have an assessment of those risks and controls in place, which are being verified, then technically you are in breach. So this is really important for you to start, or for anyone else who's in that boat, to start looking at those opportunities, or reaching out maybe to Arthur and Dewal to talk about the models that they've been proposing today, to try and help you start to plan and address that. Now, I'm going to see if I can squeeze in a couple more. Is there any support for local government agencies? Samantha asks. Samantha, not through the WorkSafe program that Arthur talked to. There are some guidance materials available for local government agencies through some of your departments, as well as maybe through groups like EML or otherwise. What I might highlight to the entire audience, we did have on our question time slide some QR codes that were available with resources for Dewal and Arthur's businesses, as well as the Mentally Healthy Workplaces program. One of the other slides that you will find there will take you to a landing page, which is the EML landing page for mental health in the workplace, with a range of free resources, tools or otherwise. Over the last 10 years, EML's put $142 million worth into research, innovation and designing those tools. So they will remain available to you post this event. And then Samantha, you can reach back out to me if you need some additional help. Jim is saying to qualify for the program, so this will be for you, Arthur, what is considered to be low-level maturity?
Yeah, there's once you go into the eligibility requirement, there is a question which takes you to a form which looks at the maturity piece. So there's a set of questions, I think off the top of my head, it's 3 or 4 questions, which then determines that level of maturity.
Okay. Sue has asked, are workers that are temporarily under work cover for 1 to 2 days due to the nature of their work able to put forward a claim? Sue, any worker at any point in time, as long as they have a doctor that certified them with an injury related to work, is able to lodge a claim, regardless of the number of days that they're impacted. So that remains something they're available to do. Carly has asked, how does this legislation specifically differ from the current psychosocial regs in practice? So Carly, these are new regulations. There's a new code of a compliance code that's been issued, but all that they're doing is providing more clarity around an obligation that already existed, I think is what Dewal said earlier on. So those obligations have existed since the OHS Act came into effect in 2004. But what we're doing at this point in time is the regulator is coming out very clearly to say, we want employers to understand what their obligations are, and we want to give them some guidance as to how to find ways to achieve that compliance. So that's what the regs and compliance code will be. Rose is asking, will an EAP be mandatory from the 1st of December 25? So Rose, the answer is no. EAP is not mandatory, but EAP should be considered as one of the risk controls that you have. You know, Arthur talked to protect, promote, respond. Oh, no, I got
pretty
the
close.
language.
Yeah,
There's pretty close
versions of that.
Yeah, and Arthur, you talked to that being one of the things that you look at, and Dewal talked about the fact that where we look at controls, the controls have to be focused on the higher order first before you get to EAP. EAP is really sometimes considered to be after the incident, after the fact, that there's a response. Now, at that point, at 10:41, I think I've stretched my friendship for long enough. So to the audience, once again, thank you for all of your participation, the questions that you've had, and for staying on with us. I'm going to hand back to Rick Jones to close us off for today. So thank you, Rick.
Thank you, Keith. Thank you, Dwell, and thank you, Arthur. We could have really run those questions even longer, and I reckon it's testament to the engagement of the audience today to ask those questions. I do thank you for attending. As Keith has said, we'll send out a recording of this session to you all, and there's a few more questions that are still there that we'll attempt to give an answer to as well, and we'll send that out via email. Again, thank you for joining us. I thank you for using email as your agent of choice to manage your claims. We're always here to help. And if you have any questions, please reach out. Once again, thanks everybody and have a good day.
Thank you.